Welcome back, everybody, on this chilly Wednesday as we're recording. And if you're listening on a Sunday, it's going to be cold as well on Sunday. It's podcast 192 with myself, Stephen. It's Nutrients in the Mix, a podcast about the science of growing with nutrients and about how nutrients work. We're going to touch a little bit about how nutrients react with each other, how they work in soil and cocoa and hydro, and essentially just some top tips for understanding your nutrients and what's going on in your plant. So firstly and foremost, talking about nutrients, we're going to give love to our, nearly said sponsors there. Sponsors sounds dirty, doesn't it? They're our partners, podcast partners. And we start with CANNA. So CANNA Nutrients. I'm going to be talking a little bit, when we talk about nutrients, we'll be talking a little bit about CANNA Nutrients in here, but we'll also be talking about others as well, different PK ratios. CANNA's got their 13, 14. Other companies have 9, 18. Other companies have different ratios. We're going to touch a little bit about ratios and what they mean with PK. But CANNA, just phenomenal nutrients, easy to use, stabilize your pH for you. So especially in the cocoa, you don't need to do much pHing with your cocoa with CANNA. And they've got a product for everybody. So big love to CANNA Nutrients. Also, we have AutoPot watering systems, gravity fed, bottom fed watering systems, no electricity needed, just phenomenal systems working all around the world in every climate, every environment you can think of. And I said it last week, I said this week, if they're not working for you, it's probably because you haven't set them up right. I don't know any good grower that's got a bad result from an AutoPot. Next up, SANlight LED, the LED. And I am biased because we've been to their facility and we love the people, but SANlights are our favourite LEDs. And if you haven't even heard of them or looked at them, then do some research. SANlight LED, why are they the best LED? What are they doing? Coming up with new generation LEDs. You buy them from a Highlight Horticulture because I know Gareth's listening on Instagram. And we've had nothing but love from them. If we didn't, and some people will be thinking, well, you're only saying that because they're partners. If we didn't think that SANlight were performers, then we just wouldn't shout about them that much. They would still be a podcast partner. We wouldn't go over the top on them because we wouldn't want to be seen to be silly in 6 months' time when people get their own results and don't get a result. But I stand firmly behind the SANlight LEDs, the brilliant lights. Next up, we have Revolution Microelectronics. These are the big boys, 1,000-watt double-ended lights. They do ceramic metal halides, and in other parts of the world, they do the Avicii LED as well. And last, but by no means least, CAN filters, fans, ducting, EC fans, AC fans, light filters, original filters. They've got everything you need for your grow room extraction. Long-time partnership with CAN, not just on the podcast, for over 8 years in the shop, and never look back. Also distributed by Highlight Horticulture. Good people, good company. And that is all the partners of the podcast. We only choose the best, you know. So that's it. It's podcast 192, all about nutrients. And we'll see you after the break.
All good? Ready to go? Turn my voice up a little bit. Oh, God, for everyone watching, the whole family.
Are you ready to go? Are you built to be in the house that I built, in the booth that I built?
I know people tune in every Sunday to listen, but even when business is good, we still manage to do the podcast.
Right. Instagram, what are we saying? Little Green Grows, much love from Liverpool as well, up in Scotland. It must be freezing in Scotland. I don't know how you cope up in there. I've been up in Scotland, Premier Hydroponics. I've been there for a little bit in the winter, and it was Baltic. I wore 2 coats. Have I ever used Remo nutrients? No, I've used the Velo Kelp, did well with Velo Kelp, but any kelp product is going to do really well. I do know a few people that have used Remo nutrients, and to be honest, not had the best feedback. They're not shit, but they're not brilliant. It's definitely, in my opinion, it's not worth swapping from something that you're getting good results to go and try out Remo. I haven't heard enough good feedback to counter the people who didn't do too well with it. So can't get really a thumbs up from me on that. What else have we had? All comments coming in already. Dr. Green tips. Oh, you're using Remo now. Well, let me know what are you thinking about them? How are you getting on with them? So, good. I've got through the comments. I will occasionally go back to the comments. Make sure you ask your questions if you've got any while we're talking, and I'll go through them every 20 minutes. So we're going to start with what, why, how, when. What is NPK? What is calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and the micronutrients? So we'll start with NPK. We'll start with the name of our company, the reason why we called ourselves NPK Technology, NPK Podcast, NPK Media. NPK stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in the chemical elements. If you're watching, then you can see that we've got the podcast 192 screen coming up there. That is the periodic table. And if you find NP and K on it, that stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. People say that these are the three most important elements for plant growth, but I disagree. They're not. They're the elements that are used in the highest quantities given as a fertilizer. All 17 essential elements are important, and without any one of them, then your plant will either severely suffer or potentially not fruit, flower, and for some plants won't go to seed. Even the trace minerals, even one of the 17 trace minerals, such as molybdenum, you don't have enough molybdenum, your plant's not going to do very well. So they're not the most important. They're just in fertilizer, they're what we have to give the most of because it's what the plant uses the most of. Before NPK, we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, CHNO. We get our carbon from carbon dioxide, CO2. We get our hydrogen from H2O, and it's also where we get our oxygen from as well. So that's why we have to have highly oxygenated roots. That's why we feed them water, and it's why they need a good, ready supply of carbon dioxide so that they get the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Then we feed them NPK. You'll see the NPK given on ratios on bottles, and that stands for the amount of each N, P, and K within the bottle. So if you've got, you might see 5, 3, 2, that means a ratio of 5 nitrogen, 3 phosphorus, and 2 potassium. The 4 elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, make up 95% of a plant's dry mass. So if we're looking on increasing plant's dry mass, which is what a lot of people want to do, you need to look at your carbon, which is carbon dioxide. It's why it's worth supplementing extra CO2. You need to look at your hydrogen and your oxygen, which is your water. So how can hydrogen and oxygen make up the majority of the dry weight? We need to make sure that we're watering efficiently, but making sure that they're being oxygenated as well. The nitrogen is going to come from fertilization, so we need to make sure that we're giving the plant as much nitrogen as it needs, but not overdoing it at the same time. So alongside carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, there are 14 nutrients that we need to make available to the plant. These are, I've got a little table here, so I don't get any of them wrong. So we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and we have our NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then we have another couple of macronutrients. So we have calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. So those are macronutrients. They're still needed in high quantities, not quite as much as NPK, but calcium, magnesium, sulfur is still very important. Then we move on to our micronutrients. We have boron, copper, iron, manganese, zinc, molybdenum, chlorine in trace amounts, and nickel. And there's one on here called cobalt, because apparently some recent research has showed that cobalt is quite important in plants, but the scientists are figuring that one out, whether to make 18 essential plant nutrients. So they're the 17. Some people say that the 16 essential plant nutrients. I don't know which one that they're missing out, but there's definitely 17. I think some research shows there was 16 essential plant nutrients back in the 50s. It's definitely 17. So make sure that you're getting the full 17. And then on that point, if you buy a good full fertilizer range, CANNA, for example, they have everything you need in their A and B. And then you can grow a full plant on A and B. It does have everything that you need. And then when we get onto other nutrients, you boost your PKs there to help increase the plant's health, the vigor, the quality. And if you're adding PK, it will help with yield as well. As in flowering, you need a little bit more phosphorus and potassium. So on this sheet, it's got a little bit of mobility of the nutrients within the plant and mobility in the soil. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on, but you really need to understand mobility in the plant, because if you understand how mobile nutrient is within the plant, you start to understand deficiencies, and you'll start to see that when a deficiency occurs at the bottom or at the top, they can look very similar, but actually very different nutrients, and it's whether they're mobile or immobile, but we'll come back to that one a little bit later on. So how do plants uptake nutrients? This is the interesting part for the nerds out there like me. All nutrients in their ionic form have charges, negative or positive. You've probably come across this, maybe in cation exchange capacity, CEC. The positively charged ions are called cations, and the negatively charged ions are anions. And I remember them because anions looks and sounds like onions, and onions make you cry, which is a bad thing, so they're negative for me. Depending on how you feel about cations, they can be positive or negative. I fucking hate cats. I think they're God's little fucking trick to humans, little shits. So I think they're negative, but cations are positive. So anions, onions make you cry, they're negative. Cations, for some people, they like them, so we'll call them positive. But just stick to onions, and anions, they're negative. So the media that you use has a CEC, it's a cation exchange capacity. That's basically the amount of positively charged ions that the media can hold around it. The higher the CEC, the more cations it can hold. So soil tends to have a higher CEC because of the texture and because of the way the soil is made up with humics and peat moss, very, very little cocoa, if any. The fibres, it does have a higher CEC, so it can hold on to more cations, which is why when we use a soil fertilizer, they are a lot weaker than a cocoa or a hydro fertilizer because we have to feed less. So the higher the CEC, the more cations it can hold. A plant, this is where it sort of gets interesting, especially for the nerds like me. A plant will release a hydrogen ion, H+, through something called a proton pump. So what this does is the plant will release a hydrogen ion, which is H+, and what that does is it will knock off an ion that's held within the media. So if we use an example to make this a little bit easier, NH4+ is ammonia and it's nitrogen. So NH4+, because it's 4, will require 4 hydrogen ions to be released by the plant to be able to uptake the ammonia. And that's what happens in media like soil and cocoa. And once it's knocked off the ammonia from the exchange site, that allows it to be uptaken by the plant. And also, that's why in good vegetative growth, your pH will tend to rise because as it's releasing hydrogen ions and hydroxyl ions, which is something that we'll mention later, hydroxyl are OH-. Hydrogen ions are acidic, hydroxyl ions are alkaline. And as the plant takes up negative ions, it has to release negative ions, it has to release hydroxides. So negative ions are things like your nitrates, your NO3-, things like your phosphorus, your sulfur, boron, chlorine, they're all negative ions. So because nitrogen and phosphorus are negative ions, it's what we use a lot of in veg. The plant has to release a lot of OH ions, negative, to be able to uptake them. And what you should see is you should see your pH drift upwards. Really easy to see this in things like DWC. So as you set up your water butt and you give it all the elements, you give it its feed that it needs, you should be checking pH, making sure it's around between 5.5 and 6.3. After about 3 or 4 days in good vegetative growth and the plant's uptake nutrients, that pH will rise, and that's why. So it's a good way to spot it's a good way to spot whether your plant is feeding healthily, because if the pH is drifting upwards, then the plant is feeding healthily. If the pH is drifting downwards, then it can be a sign of root rot, and it can be a sign of not feeding properly, and you can make adjustments. But it does get a little bit sciencey, talking about proton pumps and releasing hydrogen ions and OH ions. But if we understand why they release those ions in order to uptake other ions, then we can understand what happens with pH, why pH is important, and it starts to make a little bit more sense. We start to get a better understanding of what's going on within the plant's rhizosphere, within the plant's root zone. In hydroponics, if you're wondering, there's no cation exchange capacity. There's no areas for these negative or positive ions to be held onto because there's no media. So what a plant does, it will still have to release those hydrogen ions, still have to release those hydroxyl ions to make sure that the balance within the plant is still right. So if it has to uptake, let's use an example, NO3-, if it has to take up nitrogen in the nitrate form, then it has to release 3 hydroxyl ions, 3 OH-, in order to keep equilibrium, being able to keep it all the same. So that's why, again, our pH will rise and it's uptaking the nitrogen. So I've just finished off the sentence there on my notes. The plant will release OH or hydroxides to uptake anions or negatively charged particles. Nitrate, nitrogen, phosphorus are negatively charged ions, and the plant releases hydroxide to uptake them. And OH is alkaline, so you tend to see a pH drift upwards in veg because the plants are feeding healthily and exchanges are happening readily. Just had to finish off my notes, make sure where I'm up to there. So I hope that little brief insight into, if you look at nutrients and the form that they take, I'll show you my sheet here. So if you see the uptake form, it'll probably be backwards for Instagram. But you can Google images, look at nutrients, and you can look at the nutrient forms. You can see whether your nitrogen, your phosphorus, potassium, you can see whether they're negative or positive. And it's why when we get into flower, the plant starts to use a little bit more potassium, a little bit more calcium, magnesium, a little bit more of the positive nutrients, and our pH starts to balance. If you're in a hydroponics system, you'll start to see that in flower, and your pH doesn't drift up or down as much anymore. And that's because they're taking slightly less nitrogen, slightly less phosphorus, and a little bit more of the positive ions. So pH starts to balance out a little bit. Let's see what people are asking before we move on. Rex's people, how are you? Been a long time. Good to see you back. Does CO2 higher than 1,500 parts per million make plants sick? I've got wall natural gas, wall heater in my bedroom that makes the CO2 really high. Does it make it higher than 50? So 1,500, my personal opinion from the research I've seen, natural CO2 that everyone's breathing outside is 400 parts per million, 390, 400 parts per million. In a closed room or in a room where you can monitor your ventilation, people will use CO2 burners or CO2 canisters to pump extra CO2, because you will get, like we said at the beginning, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen make up 95% of a plant's dry weight. So if we can add more carbon, get more carbon into the plant, then we're going to get better yields. Taking your CO2 up to 800, so double what's outside, great results. You very rarely go wrong at 800 ppm. Experienced growers who've been using CO2 for a while, you can take your CO2 ppm up to about 1,200. 1,500 is that, for me, is the absolute max. So, and I'm going to use the car driving analogy here. You're driving your car 1,500 parts per million CO2. You have to make sure that your temperature's higher as well, because you have to increase the plant's metabolism. So make sure that your temperatures are higher. If you've got 23, 24 degrees Celsius and you're running 1,500 parts per million CO2, it's wasted. You need to make sure you're at your 28, you're at your 29 degrees Celsius, and whatever else that is in Fahrenheit. You can do the equations. Then that's where you need to be at to be running 1,500 CO2. To give you an analogy, that's like being in your car, super high performance car, and you're driving at 150 miles an hour. Now, if you hit a pothole or a divot, or some other idiot driver on the road cuts you up at 150 miles an hour, then everything's going a lot faster. Any mistakes that you make are going to be exaggerated than if you got at 70 miles an hour. So I would say to people using CO2, stick to your 1,200 parts per million. the metabolism ticks along nicely. You can increase your temperatures a little bit. And if you do make a mistake, if you do overwater, underwater, then it's not going to be the end of the world. Anything above 1500 is, I've seen no research to have any benefit. Whether you run in the perfect room and you add 2000 ppm CO2, the plant can only uptake a certain amount of carbon dioxide. So anything above 1500 it's going to cost you money and doesn't actually give you anything back that you're spending out. It's just, if it was a graph, it goes up and up and up and it starts to peter off. And actually, if you get too much, it'll actually start to decrease. And it's the same with light as well. A plant can only take up so much light. So if you give too much, there's no actual real benefit in yield or quality to increasing your light. So there's always an upper limit, and it's finding out where that upper limit is for you specifically, for the amount of plants that you've got, and making sure that you don't go too far above it. Comments on YouTube, anything else? Indica Head Shop Afternoon, always good to have you here on a Wednesday. Rex's people said sulfur ? Absolutely. Sulfur is something that probably a lot of people don't talk about, don't know that plants use. I'll give you a great example, one of my favourites, Buddha's Tree 918. It's not just a 918 pK ratio, it has quite a lot of sulfur in there as well. So if people that have been using Buddha's Tree and are thinking, why do I get such good quality using their 918? It's the amount of sulfur in it. Sulfur helps. I've got it here actually. Amino acid formation, enzyme and vitamin development, seed production, chlorophyll formation. So amino acids, we'll get into that a little bit later on, but all of the things that sulfur does helps improve the plant's quality and is a very important nutrient as well. It's one of the macronutrients or secondary nutrients as opposed to nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. So good, glad that answers your question, Rex. So what else has anyone said on Instagram? So about Remo, Dr. Green Tip said, the only thing I don't like is there's nothing to do anymore. Brilliant products, good feedback. Yeah, it's good. I've started using the one compo from Dutch Pro, got all 17 in one product. Yeah, it's a newly released product from Dutch Pro, one compo, single part feed. I haven't used it myself, haven't heard anybody using it yet, but good to see someone getting some good results. And also he said that he thought that the pH going up is a bad thing. In veg, your pH going up is a good thing. It means your plant is feeding healthily. Absolutely, I love it when my pH goes up in veg because it means that the plants are uptaking nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, really well. And then you should start to see it balance out in flower. So we've talked about how the nutrients make the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium accessible. Now, once it's accessible, once the proton pumps released hydrogen, knocked off the negative anions from the media, how did he take it up? There's 3 methods that plants will use to take up nutrients. Simple diffusion, we all learned that in biology. Facilitated diffusion, another biology one, and active transport. All the biology terms come back out. Diffusion, nutrients moving from an area of high concentration, the media, to an area of a low concentration inside the root. It's natural, doesn't require any energy. And as we feed our nutrients, that's what happens. We have an area of high concentration in the media, area of low concentration in the roots, and it will naturally work the way up into the roots. Facilitated diffusion is the second one. Rapid movement of ions following a concentration gradient facilitated by transport proteins. So this is where slightly bigger molecules that find it harder to move by diffusion will be facilitated by transport proteins within the root. So a little bit harder, but that's how we get bigger molecules into the root system. And then the third one, active transport. The uptake by cells of ions or molecules against a concentration gradient. This requires an energy source, which is ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine, not really important, although it is. The important one, the thing that I'm interested in is the triphosphate. You have 3 phosphates, and that is why phosphorus is really important all the way through veg, all the way through flower, because it makes up the energy molecule ATP. Without it, nothing would happen within the plant. So the ATP energy molecule powers pumps within the roots that move the ions and molecules through the membrane. And this will happen once it's taken up nutrients into the roots. And if there's a higher concentration of a single or a particular nutrient within the root, but it still needs more, then it will have to use active transport to take it from the lower concentration outside the root and to bring it into the root zone. But that takes energy, and all three work at different stages. It gets really complicated. You don't really need to know it as growers. I don't need to know it really, other than just simple nerd interest. If you are interested, then that's where you need to get into. But the uptake of nutrients is quite interesting. Understanding that there's a motorway into the plant, and if the motorway has 3 lanes, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium take up the biggest. They're the big trucks. They're the ones that get in there the most. Then you have calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. They're your 7-seater vehicles, and then your micronutrients. If you're pushing too much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, if you've got too many trucks on your motorway, then there's not enough room for calcium, magnesium, sulfur, because those 7-seaters, those bigger cars, are being blocked out by the trucks. And if you've got too many 7-seater trucks, then your micronutrients, your small cars can't get up. So if you think about our root zone, our root system as a nutrient highway where there's cars, there's trucks, you don't want to overdo it with any one nutrient. That's why I say there's not one nutrient is more important than the others. Because if you do, then it's going to block out other nutrients and you're going to have problems. We will move on to it. I think I've pulled up Mulder's chart for later on. But if you're interested now, I'm showing people on Instagram, showing people on YouTube. That's Mulder's chart. And it's a chart of plant interactions. But we'll come on to that a little bit later on and I'll explain it. But if you can get the image up, oh, look at that. Well, we're cooking with gas this week, Josh. It's up on, look at that, Instagram people on my computer. That's the Instagram feed, and we've put the actual Mulder's chart up on Instagram. We're flying. So, yeah, and then Josh put the second one up, which is a really good, I actually found this yesterday when I was doing some research. It's how the plant uses nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, all the essential nutrients and what they're used for. So it'd be good to have that up on your home, pin it to the wall, because you can see if you're lacking phosphorus, then phosphorus is really important for carbohydrate production, vegetative growth, root growth, energy transfer, nutrient uptake. It'll help you start to see what deficiencies you've got and what you're probably going to expect because you've got those deficiencies. So yeah, that's brilliant. I love that we can do this now. So if you're watching on Instagram, you need to get over to YouTube because we're putting all fancy stuff up on there. So that's how plants get the nutrients into the root zone. I like me little analogies, me root zones and me motorways, me trucks. So what do they do when they're in there? We've got 17 essential plant nutrients. Start with nitrogen and all the noisy motorbikes outside. Nitrogen. Element form N. Is it mobile within a plant? Yes. Formation of amino acids, vitamins, proteins, and cell division. So this is why nitrogen is needed in the highest quantities, or the plant uses the most of it in the vegetative stage. The formation of amino acids. If you don't know what amino acids are, there are 21 amino acids, and they're things like histidine, lysine, isolysine. There's lots, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but when they form together, they form proteins, and they're especially important in the vegetative stages. Vitamins, formation of vitamins, and what vitamins do is there's not a vitamin that increases plant growth. Vitamins can be seen as the fuel for your car. They help nutrients get around the plant. They help the formation of the building blocks within the plant. And lastly, cell division. The plant grows the most in the vegetative stage, obviously, and that's why nitrogen is used in the highest quantities, because nitrogen increases cell division. Phosphorus, element P, mobile, yes. And when I'm saying mobile or immobile, let's talk about mobility of nutrients for a second so we don't get lost. If a nutrient is mobile within a plant, then let's use nitrogen as an example. Once nitrogen has been fixed into a point within a leaf and used, and it's the bottom set of the leaf, it's an old growth. If for some reason your plant doesn't get nitrogen, then it will take it from the bottom of the plant and give it to the top of the plant where it's needed. So it is mobile, can be moved from one part of the plant to another. If a nutrient is immobile, then once it's been locked into place, like calcium, then if you have a calcium deficiency, they can't move it from the bottom to the top. So the top of the plant will get your calcium deficiencies. So if a nutrient is mobile, your deficiencies will happen on the older growth. If your nutrient is immobile, it won't move, then you'll get your deficiencies at the top of the plant. So phosphorus, element P, it is mobile. So you'll get your deficiencies at the bottom of the older growth. It's used for energy storage and transfer. So one plant gets energy through light. Photosynthesis turns light energy into glucose, sugar energy. When it stores that energy, it uses phosphorus to store it, and energy transfer. So moving that energy around the plant uses phosphorus. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP. It's the energy currency of a plant. It's how plants do everything. It's also used for cell growth, which is why it's used a lot in veg. It's used for root and seed formation and helps with water use. So it can help regulate water loss. It can help regulate water uptake. Very important element. Potassium, the last of the big three. Element K, and it's mobile, so deficiencies will occur at the older growth. Carbohydrate metabolism, breakdown and translocation of energy, water efficiency, fruit formation, disease resistance. So potassium plays quite a big role, but in a very varied role as well. So carbohydrate metabolism, once it's got its energy, how does it use that energy? Potassium's in charge of that. Secondary nutrients, you've got calcium, Ca. Is it mobile? No. So deficiencies are going to be at the top of the plant. Involved in cell division and formation, used a lot in veg. Nitrogen metabolism, so how is nitrogen used within the plant? That's calcium's job. Translocation, which is essentially the movement of elements within the plant. Fruit set, chlorophyll production. Chlorophyll is what makes a plant green. It's how a plant takes the energy from the sun and turns it into sugars. Phosphorus mobility, so moving calcium is the one that will help move phosphorus around the plant. Iron utilization and fruit maturation. So calcium actually moved on to my sheet's just gone crazy there. Iron utilization and fruit maturation, and then it's all offset there. But calcium is important, but think of it like calcium with humans. Calcium in humans, strong bones. Calcium within plants, strong cells. If you have a good adequate amount of calcium, then we've got here chlorophyll production. It will help increase the size of the cells, help water retention, and make sure that the plant's strong. Lack of calcium, you'll start to see that they're weak, they can wilt easy, and a lack of calcium just has a lot of problems that come with it. Magnesium, calcium and magnesium work really well together. That's why we have bottles of CalMag. Magnesium, element Mg, it is mobile, so you're going to get new deficiencies and can't speak today. You're going to get deficiencies on the older growth, tend to be at the bottom of the plant. This will help with, I think actually, calcium, magnesium. Calcium is cell division formation, nitrogen metabolism, translocation. I think they've put the two together because they work well together. Magnesium will also with chlorophyll production, phosphorus mobility, and fruit maturation. So for any gardeners out there, especially tomato gardeners, then you can get blossom end rot, BER, and you'll get blossom end rot. It's basically the tomato caving in, and that's because of a lack of calcium and magnesium. So make sure if you're a tomato grower, you've got your calcium and magnesium in there. Lastly, with the secondary nutrients or the macronutrients, sulfur, it's not mobile. You will get deficiencies on the newer growth. It's involved with amino acid formation, enzyme and vitamin development, seed production, and chlorophyll formation. And you'll see within these first 6 elements that a lot of the things that they do are involved in cell division, amino acids, carbohydrate metabolism, and chlorophyll production. So that's why these are used in the highest amounts, because they're the main processes going on within a plant. So nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, they are also likely to be the things that you are deficient in. So if you're looking on deficiencies, make sure that they're the things that are going to get your first bit of attention. And now that you know what's mobile, what's not mobile, see is your deficiency at the bottom of the plant or is it at the top of the plant, and I'll help you understand where deficiencies are coming from. We're going to fire through these micronutrients because it's that with micro, You very rarely tend to get a deficiency in micronutrients unless something's really off with your pH or you've overdone it with your other nutrients. You've got boron, B, it's not mobile. Pollen grain germination, seed and cell wall formation, sugar translocation, so moving sugars around the plant. Chlorine, Cl, it is mobile, but the role isn't very well understood even for the scientists out there. But I think I read with chlorine, it helps move other elements around the plant and helps the systems within the plant stabilize and make sure that everything's going on as it should do. Copper, Cu, not mobile. Again, deficiencies will be at the top of the plant or the newer growth. Metabolic catalyst, so it'll help increase the plant's metabolism. Functions in photosynthesis and reproduction, increase sugar, intensify colour, improves flavour. So for the flavour people out there, copper is important. That doesn't mean overdo it with the copper. You'll end up with problems, but that's where your flavour and your sugars and your colours are all coming from, is the copper. Iron, Fe, it's not mobile. Deficiencies at the top of the plant. Very, very important in chlorophyll formation. It's an oxygen carrier. If you were good at biology, you'll know iron was the central molecule in hemoglobin, which is within the blood, carries oxygen around the body. It's also the oxygen carrier within a plant, helps with cell division and growth. You've got manganese, not mobile, involved in enzyme systems, chlorophyll synthesis, and phosphorus and calcium availability. Then you've got molybdenum, nickel, zinc, as we go down, used in lower amounts, but still equally important. But if you're interested, download what nutrients are used for, look into them. It'll really help you with understand the deficiencies and what's going on within the plant. So that's what the nutrients do in the plant. How do they behave in the soil and when in the plant? So what I wanted to go into here was mobility. And we've talked a little bit about mobility. It'll help you understand deficiencies, top, middle, bottom, where they're occurring in the plant. Mobility in soil, not as important for indoor growers. This is more for outdoor growers, but it's still good to understand. Just because something's mobile in a plant doesn't mean it's mobile in a soil. If it's mobile in the soil, it means that if you overwater, you're going to wash that nutrient away and the plant could become deficient in it. If it is immobile, then it tends to stick around in the media and you can potentially overdo it as well. So good to know if you're interested in the mobility of nutrients in the plant and in the soil. It's good to know because it can just help you get that better understanding of what's happening with nutrients in the plant, what's happening with nutrients outside the plant. If you tend to overwater, then what nutrients you're washing away, what nutrients are going to stick around and can you overdo it with. And there's some good little document there. I think we need to be able to post these somewhere. So I think on YouTube now, you can post up links and documents. I'm going to try and, if that's something that you're interested in, you can see what I've been working with, then I'll start posting them up. So just give a thumbs up, or if you're interested in seeing the documents that we use to do the research. So we know how nutrients get into the plants. We know what they do when they get in there. We know roughly spotting deficiencies, and not what the deficiency is, but hopefully this podcast will help you understand then how to identify it. Now, how do nutrients interact when you water into the media, when they're in the water in the hydroponic system, or when they're actually traveling to the plant? And that's where Mulder's chart comes in. Josh, if you could throw Mulder's chart up onto the YouTube link, I'm going to talk about it for 2 minutes here. So people on Instagram, I know you're not going to be able to look at it straight away, but that's Mulder's chart. Go and Google images it and have a little look at what it's about and what it means. In a nutshell, the green lines were the antagonisms. So they're the ones that don't like each other. If calcium and phosphorus come into contact with each other, then there's going to be problems. If potassium and phosphorus spend too much time on the pathways, they're going to get into problems. Then you've got stimulation, which is the black arrows. Now these, when you add more of phosphorus, then magnesium is taken up a lot more. So the black lines, because there's a lot of green lines. If you overdo it with one type of nutrient, then you can severely hinder how other nutrients are uptaken into the plant. The black lines, there's very few of them, so we can talk about them. If you increase manganese, you can increase the potassium uptake. If you increase molybdenum uptake, that will increase copper uptake. Phosphorus and magnesium work both ways. So if you increase phosphorus, magnesium uptake will increase. If you increase magnesium, phosphorus uptake will increase. And then we have nitrogen, which will increase magnesium uptake, and molybdenum, which increases nitrogen uptake as well. So being aware of what nutrients work well with each other can help. If you're a developed grower, if you've been doing this for a while and you're looking at just those little 1%, those 2% that can help increase yields, increase quality, and basically get the genetic maximum out of your plant, this is one of the ways to do it. So for example, phosphorus and magnesium, understand that if you are given CalMag to a plant, then the magnesium will stimulate phosphorus uptake. And that's really interesting because calcium is basically a bastard to every other nutrient. You see, it's top of the Mulder's chart there. It's got green lines going to nearly every nutrient. If you're using calcium in excess, it's going to stop a lot of other products. But we use CalMag, calcium and magnesium. A good top tip for flowering is if you're doing your PK and you do it quite heavily, adding a little bit of calcium magnesium can help increase the uptake of phosphorus because of the magnesium. But you've got to be careful as well because calcium is he hates everybody. He just doesn't like any other nutrients and will just try and stop everyone from getting up. So it's a fine balance. Download Mulder's chart and start to understand what nutrients are antagonistic and what nutrients are synergistic, it's called, or they help stimulate other nutrients to be uptaken. So the growing part of it. This is where I want you to ask your questions. If you don't understand or you've got general growing questions, nutrient mix and pHs, ECs, hard or soft water, nutrient oxygenation, make sure you get these questions in now because this is what we're going to go over very brief, or quite quickly because we're on 40 minutes at the moment. So a few questions. Have I heard of innovating plant products and nutrients companies seem quite good? Yes, we do. We sell a few IPP products in the shop. Not heard anything bad about them. Customers that take them get good feedback from it. So innovating plant products, good set of nutrients. Haven't used them myself. Can't give you first-hand feedback, but nothing bad to say about them at all. Indica said, why do plant stems turn yellow in flower? Is this a deficiency? So I actually thought that was going to say purple, and I've always got the answer for purple stems. It's when your media is too cold. It basically, when they go purple or red, that's a phosphorus or sugar uptake. So when the sugars find it hard to move around the plant, that's because the media is cold, the root zone's cold, phosphorus uptake's decreased, and phosphorus will help move sugars around the plant. So that's why you get red stems. It's not good either, so you need to warm up your root medium there. But when they turn yellow, then they should be a nice green colour. So I wouldn't say it's a deficiency. Deficiencies will primarily show themselves on the leaves because that's where they want to end up. So if your leaves are yellow and your stem's yellow, 100% a deficiency. If it's just the stem that's yellow, it's not something I've personally experienced, but something's not right. So I would do a little bit of Googling, see if anyone on the forums has also experienced yellowing of the stems and try and get a bit of a consensus. Don't just take one forum's opinion of it. Overwatering, Indica's just said, is it overwatering? It could be. Overwatering is one of the main mistakes that we make as growers. Everybody that's been doing this for a while has overwatered at one point. So when the leaves go yellow, most of the time it's because you've overwatered. So it could also be a case of the stems going the stems going yellow as well. Too high EC, that's another shout. Too high EC, I don't think would make the stems go yellow. What you would notice with a high EC is you've got too much salt getting into the plant, so you tend to get tip burn. So at the edge of the leaves, you'll notice that the very tips go brown and crispy. Excuse me. They go brown and crispy, and that's where you've got too high in EC. Some people then, especially over summer, just come out the summer period here, will have got those brown tips on the leaves and think, oh, I've been overdoing it on the EC. This is where VPD comes into it, vapor pressure deficit. If you've got a good EC, you're in veg, you're at 1.5, good EC. But if the temperature is 29 degrees and the humidity is 50%, then your transpiration rate within the plant is going to be very high. Now, if you've got a 1.5 EC and the plant's drinking and drinking and drinking, it's naturally going to take up a lot of nutrients, and you can overdo it with the nutrients in the plant, so you'll get tip burn. So probably not high EC for your yellowing stem. Overwatering potentially, but as long as the leaves are looking good, I'd just be careful. I'd make sure that I'd go onto the forums, see if anyone else has had yellowing stems. If anyone listening has had yellowing stems and has sorted the problem, make sure that you're getting the comments and let Indica know what could be going on. But just keep an eye on the plants. It's not normal. Try and find out what's going wrong. So who else has joined on Instagram? Green Queen Magazine, nice to have you on the podcast. I love your info. Would love to see how the relationship is with the body instead of plants. It's the same, but the other way around. In a lot of ways, it is, yeah. So try and think of an example. Calcium is the easiest example. Now, I don't want to get started on the cow's milk and all that sort of stuff. Calcium from veg, calcium from milk, calcium from tablets, whatever way you get your calcium, it's important on bone formation. Prevents osteoporosis, keeps the structure strong. Exactly the same with implants. Helps increase the cell walls, helps increase the strength of the cell walls, helps regulate water in and out of the cells. You're lacking calcium, you'll see the deficiency, but you'll also see that the plant can wilt easier, and you'll just start to see a general unhealthiness within the plant. Other things within humans. So I do tend to use a few human analogies. The one that I've just spoke about there. When you're on holiday in the summer, on the beach, wherever it is in the world, and you're on your reclining seat, it's 35 degrees, you've got your cocktail in one hand and you've got your book in the other. How often do you sit there thinking, ooh, I wish I had a roast dinner right now? A steaming hot pile of potatoes right next to me, that's what I could use. It's never. And that's because it's hot, you want water, you want to stay hydrated. On the other side, how often now are you sat in on a Monday night, watching The Walking Dead, got the fire on, thinking, you know what I could do with right now? A lolly ice, or a nice big pint of water. No, it's cups of tea. It's pans of scouse if you're from Liverpool, or big hearty meals. And it's because we're cool, we want to start getting ready for hibernation. Plants are very similar. When it's hot, they want water. They don't want feed. When it's cool, you need to up your EC because they need feed. Or when they do drink, you need to make sure that the food is there readily available for them. It's very, very similar to humans. I think actually that would be a good podcast to do. Maybe one for in the next few weeks or few months. Can do research about what nutrients or what happens in a plant and see how similar it is to humans. Because I know when I give the analogies out, a lot of people, it helps them to understand what's going on within the plant. So yeah, very good comment, and thank you very much for getting involved. Queen Salka said, yo, missed most of it. Is what you were talking about showing available somewhere to have a look at? So yeah, if you've just joined or you haven't managed to see the majority of the podcast, the live version takes about an hour to be uploaded to YouTube. You can listen to the podcast. If you've been watching live, you can listen to an edited version on Sunday on our Spotify or YouTube or Podbean or iTunes, wherever it is, you can listen to the podcast. So get the live version about an hour in full, or listen to the podcast on Sunday. So the growing part of it, we're going to start with hard or soft water. Are you hard or soft? And actually, that sounded a bit wrong that for a podcast. Hard water generally has an excess of calcium and magnesium. Soft water doesn't. The reason we have hard and soft water depends on where you get your water from. Rainfall falls through a certain type of rock. If it's made up of calcium and magnesium, it will precipitate into the water and it ends up in your water supply, hard water. If you, like in Liverpool, we have very soft water. I think it goes through limestone. Nothing really dissolves into the water, so we have soft water. To see if you have... water bottle going a bit mad. To see if you have hard or soft water, run a litre of water into a jug, take your EC meter. If it's below 0.3, you have soft water. If it's above 0.4, you have hard water. If it's above 0.8, you are fucked. get a reverse osmosis machine, because anything above 0.8, and it's been heard of, even around the London area, it's really not worth doing anything with that. You'd need hard water nutrients especially, and you would need really to get an RO machine. But on the subject of RO machines, they are expensive. We have a preferred RO machine called Hydrologic, very, very good. And really everybody should be using RO machines, because you start with nothing. You can add your little bit of calcium magnesium at the beginning to help buffer the water, and then you're adding your A's and your B's. So that is a good way to start. RO machine, a little bit of calcium magnesium. Then you would add your silica if you're still on your potassium silicates to prevent pH fluctuations, and then you'd start adding your A and B, and you start with the same every time, so you can get the same results if you get good results time and time again. So RO machines get a big thumbs up from ourselves. Now you need to know hard water or soft water, because if you're going to go and buy your A and B, you need to know whether it's hard water A and B or soft water A and B. The big difference: hard water based nutrients remove the majority of calcium and magnesium because you've already got it available. Soft water A and B or soft A and B have the calcium magnesium added because they know that you have very little in your tap water. The other thing that hard water does is, the hard water A and B, is it's very acidic. When you've got such an excess of calcium and magnesium, when you try and change the pH of the hard water, you have to use a phenomenal amount of pH down or phosphoric acid. So what their A and B is, hard water A and B has that excess of acid in just the right proportions, so that so that you can manipulate your pH a lot easier. So that's one of the main differences with hard water based nutrients. But invest in an RO machine. I know they're expensive, but they'll last forever. Replacing the filters once every 6 months or once every year cost you buttons, cost 20-30 pounds to replace the filter once you've got the main unit, and they really are worth the investment. So which nutrients should you all buy? This is one of the questions. This is one of the questions to find out if you're in a good grow shop as well, because certain nutrients have good profit margins on, certain nutrients have okay profit margins, and some nutrients have really shit profit margins. That really shouldn't, when I say shit profit margins for a shop, it's not the end of the world. It's not, you're not going to go bankrupt if that's just what you sold. But there's some nutrients out there that entice the shop to sell more of them because they make more money. It's a business at the end of the day. However, we firmly believe that looking after the end grower and giving the best quality advice and doing this podcast return dividends, because if you know that we're giving you honest advice, you will come back time and time again. And that's what all good grow shops realize is, don't sell products purely for profit. Sell products that suit the customer, that look after the customer so that they are happy with what they get, and then they come back to shop time and time again. It's long-term business. So it's the question you ask to find out if you're in a shit shop. What is the best nutrients? If the shop points you to one or two nutrients, said that they're the best, there's nothing better, be aware, because all nutrients work. All nutrients work really well. And it's as simple as that. All nutrients work. Like, let me just give you an example. Vitalink, well known for being a cheap nutrient. I've got a few people that get really good results with Vitalink, and their PK, their buddy, costs £10 for a litre, £8 in some shops. Really good product. People get good results on it. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's shit. Just because it's expensive doesn't mean it's the next best thing since sliced bread. There is no best nutrient. There is a nutrient that suits you. CANNA's brilliant for beginners because it pretty much, the scientists at CANNA have put everything into the bottle to make sure you don't fuck up. That's it in a nutshell. Dutch Pro, very good nutrient for people that need a lot because it's quite cheap, does the job. The PK, as in the Explode, comes in one bottle. It's 1 ml per litre. Very good. Your Mills nutrients, your Hydrotops, then they're blends of organic and mineral nutrients. So For somebody who wants that little bit of extra quality, who wants to try and use a little bit more organic than mineral, they're the nutrients for you. Bloom yellow bottle. I know a lot of people get great results with those bottles. CX Hydroponics, your Regenerate, your Mighty Growth Enhancers, brilliant. And then you've got people that want to support British-made nutrients, your Plant Magics, your Intense Nutrients, Hydrotop's British Nutrient. So there's a nutrient for you. There's no shit nutrients. There's no well-beaten nutrients. Nutrients are salts at the end of the day. Support the company that you think deserves supporting. Support the company that works well for you in your situation, in your grow. And that's all that there is to it. And that's how you decide if you're in a good shop or a bad shop. So whatever nutrient you want to buy, one of the decisions is, do you do 1 part, 2 part, 3 part, 4 part? Do you go liquid? Do you go powder? 1 parts, in my opinion, are not as good as the other options available. The reason we separate is to prevent calcium and phosphorus from reacting. Calcium and phosphorus will react. They'll form a milky precipitate. If you've seen that and you're mixing in your nutrients, you've done something wrong. If it goes milky, then certain elements have fallen out of the solution and they're unavailable to the plant. There are methods to suspend calcium so that you can suspend the calcium so you don't dissolve it in the solution. And that way it stops it from reacting with the phosphorus. The fact is that every company, they want to do the best for themselves. So there's some single part nutrients out there. I'm not fully convinced on single part nutrients, if I'm honest. I would love somebody who designs a single part nutrient to come on and tell me why they're better than the Cocoa A and B's or the 3 parts, the 4 parts. But for me, I'm not sold on single parts. Some of the shouts are that, is it really the fact that every company wants to make as much money as possible, split the bottles into as many bottles, and that's why single parts are the best, because we put everything into 1 bottle? I'm just not convinced. I'd love somebody to come on the show. I'd love somebody to comment and have a little bit of a conversation about why their single part is good. Majority of companies have 2 parts, Cocoa A, Cocoa B. The reason they do that is because they split the calcium and phosphorus so that they don't react in a concentrated form within the bottle. You've got your 3 parts, GHE Micro, GHE Grow, GHE Bloom. I know Jason from AutoPot. If you're a long time listener to the podcast, you'll listen to Jason's podcast. He's a big fan of GHE 3 part. You split it up so you've got your Grow, your Bloom, and your Micro. And depending on the ratios of 1, 2, or 3 that you put in, you can add more growth, more bloom, more macro or micro or vitamins to the plant, and you can really steer the plant to the way that you want to go. Then you have your 4 parts, your AB Grow and your AB Bloom. So choose the one that's right for you. Some people at the moment I know are experimenting with, in veg, and a 2-part nutrient like an A and a B. They'll add more A than B in veg because it's got the majority of the nitrogen in. And they will add more B than A in flour because it's got more phosphorus in. It's got more of the flowering nutrients. So has anyone else experimented with that? Because I've never tried it, but it seems legit. It seems like it could work, but you could, if you're not proper in the ratios of the dilution rates, you could do it. So it's not something that I'd recommend. Instagram's about to go off in 10 seconds. I'll be back on. I'll redo the live, but that means we've been going for an hour. So I think I've probably got about another hour's podcast here. What we'll do is we'll make this into a 2-part. I'll be back. Share to story. Let's go to live again on Instagram. So yeah, let's wait until Instagram's back up. We're back for the 2nd hour. As Josh shits himself because he always says I overrun. So make your choice on whether it's a 1-part, a 2-part, 3-part, 4-part, liquid or powder. That's another conversation that we need to have. The vast majority of growers are using liquid nutrients. Greenhouse Powder Feeding came out with a powdered version. They did a podcast with us about 18 months ago now, a year and a half. Really good podcast. Listen to it if you want to hear Antonio Banderas' voice, Puss in Boots, because he sounds the ringer for Antonio Banderas. Listen to that podcast. Not a lot of people are using powders at the moment. I don't fully understand why. I've used powdered nutrients. The only problem I have is when you weigh out, I've had a little play with Veg and Bloom. You weigh out your base nutrients, you weigh out your shine, you add the base, you give it a good mix, you add your shine, you give it a good mix, and that's it, done. And when it normally takes 20 minutes, because you'll fill it up with water, you'll add your A, give it a good mix, you add your B, give it a good mix, check your ECs on point, make sure pH isn't drifting too far. Then before that, you might have even added your silica and done all your pH stabilization, and you add your A and B. If you're in veg, you'll add your root stem, you may be some mighty growth enhancer, and you'll be adding all these up, checking the pHs, checking the ECs, making sure water temperature is good. It can take up to 20 minutes. You add these two powders, takes 5 minutes, and you stood there thinking, surely that can't be everything I've got to do. Surely there's more to do than that. And it can throw you off a little bit. But powders, I make a prediction that powder is going to make a real forward momentum in 2020. I think they'll start to pick up in 2020. And I think as we get on, more and more people see the benefits of powder and start to use them. If anyone's against powders, I'd love to hear your comments on reasons why you're against powders, why you don't like them. And one day, probably next year, we will get the owner of Veg and Bloom. We'll get him over to the UK, and because I think Highlight do distribute Veg Bloom. So if he ever makes a trip over to UK, we'll definitely get him on the podcast and get him talking about why Veg Bloom powder are going to take over liquids. And the other question a lot of people have is, do powders really have it all? How did he stabilize certain elements? How did he put, when we're talking about trace elements, how did he put the tiniest trace elements of nickel and molybdenum and make sure that it's in that pot of powder? That's the biggest question. Veg Bloom answer it really well by their manufacturing process. So we've been on for about an hour and 5 now, and I've got I've got a good 2 pages, and what we were going to talk about is we're going to talk about root stimulators, growth enhancers, silicas, vitamins, humics and fulvics, pre-flower nutrients, post-flower nutrients, stretch inhibitors, boosters, PK boosters, pure PKs, finishing PKs, finishing products, flushers. Are you using them? But Josh will have a heart attack because we've been going for an hour and 10 already, and it's been quite heavy on the science. So we will make this a part 2. This will be next week's podcast. We'll go into all the products. We'll look how they affect EC, how they affect pH. What do they actually do? Do bigger roots mean bigger fruits? If you follow us on Instagram, you'll know what I think about that. And we'll go through some of the different products, what they cost, what the concentrations are, what the benefits are for using a £100 root stem compared to a £20 root stem. So good podcast coming up for next week. What is it? It's Halloween tomorrow. Everybody have a good Halloween. I'm off for mischief night. I'm going to cause some mischief like I always do. And thank you very much for joining us on Instagram. Thank you very much for joining us on YouTube. And always thank you very much for the people listening on podcast. Let's finish off with a couple of questions that I haven't answered. Indica said, with hard water, it's unknown what exactly is in there, which can cause problems. Exactly. Much better to start with RO water. You know exactly where you're going with it. Buddha's Tree and Hydrotops are designed for specific water types. Buddha's Tree, I'm not so sure. Hydrotops, however, if you send a water sample to Hydrotops from your tap, you can send it to them. They will make a bespoke feed specific for your water type, free of charge as well. So if you don't want to invest in RO, send your water to Hydrotops. They'll make up a specific blend just for you. Rex's people said, I'm using Roots organic soil for a base, and then I mix a super soil for the bottom of a 7-gallon pot, and the plants always start turning yellow leaves from the bottom up in a month. Bottom up, so that is nitrogen deficiency. It's a mobile nutrient, so it will be taken from the older growth and given to the new growth. So because you're using organics, what you need to do, you need to go to your local grow shop, you need to purchase Extreme Gardening Azos, and when you pot up, make sure that the roots are in direct contact with some Azos. What that does, it's a microbe, it's a nitrogen fixing bacteria, and it will take any atmospheric nitrogen, N2, and make it available to the plant in nitrate form. So you'll very rarely you'll get a nitrogen deficiency. Then what you need to do is continue topping up with other microbes that will help turn that organic nitrogen into plant available nitrogen and see if that works out for you. No other questions from Instagram. Thank you very much for joining once again. Please follow us. So you're all obviously following me on NPK Podcast. If you're listening, we go live on Instagram at NPK Podcast. On YouTube, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Reason being is that it just makes us look really good. The more subscribers you have, obviously, the better you are. It's simple. So subscribe. Everyone have a great rest of your evening. If you're listening to the podcast, have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you all next week for the second part of nutrients. Make sure you get your questions into me and I'll answer them next week live on podcast. See you all next week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.